Welcome back for the second episode of B2B TV, our brand new show dedicated to B2B marketing. As well as being extremely passionate about what we do, we chose to start this to really celebrate B2B marketing and to create a platform for discussion, debate and involvement. So we want to thank our viewers from around the world, from the States to Australia, for getting involved. We didn't expect to get such a positive response from the first episode, so we thank you. Today, myself and fellow True co-founder Richard Parsons will be talking about how to effectively target SMEs, highlighting a few critical things that we've learned and want to share from our experience. Over 99% of businesses are SMEs, so it's a huge market which represents an amazing opportunity for those targeting them. Across Europe alone, there are 21 million small to medium-sized organisations. But that in itself presents challenges for marketers. So firstly, let's just agree exactly what we mean by SME.
That's right. I think for the purposes of today, let's define it. We have SMB, small medium business in the States, SME in Europe. They're the same thing really, but there are slight different definitions. For the purpose of today, we're going to talk about micro organisations. That's 1 to 10 employees. We've got small, which is 10 to 50, and then we've got medium, which is 50 to 250. Some organisations take a sales approach. They're looking from an enterprise point of view, and they go to define it up to 1,000. But for us, that's not really meaningful. It might be meaningful from an internal structural point of view of how you sell, but from a way that these companies are buying, the way that someone is buying with 500 or 1,000 employees, it looks very similar to being like an enterprise play here. Yeah. So we're focusing, down at the bottom end where there's those high volumes that you were talking about.
So how best to market to SMEs? Just the sheer size of the market is daunting in itself, and the different categories of SMEs is quite a challenge.
That's right. Well, I suppose what we just have to do is look at the different ways that we might market. So the first area that I want to talk about is data propensity modelling. So this is really looking at your data, your database, looking at your prospect database, your customer database, and because the volumes of data here are vast, it can be big data. You can use algorithms to start to look at that data. So one of the things that we like to do for our clients, and we recommend that people do this, is that you add in as much data, sales data as well as prospect data, into one database, into one environment. So what you get there is who you're selling to, who you're marketing to, but more importantly, who's buying from you, what products they're buying, what trends are you seeing, but you're able to say which companies are profitable, which companies have got a growth trajectory, and then you can use algorithms to look at that and say, let's define who this audience are, and then go outside and look at third-party data to look for lookalikes. If you don't do that, if you're using kind of ivory tower thinking around your data, you're in danger of spending vast amounts of money. We did some of this propensity modelling for one of our clients, and we were able to put some predictive models in place that allowed us to pick certain segments and get 130 to 1 return on marketing investment. So it really is, you're focusing, it's pinpoint focusing on who are the right people to invest, which data to buy and who to invest in.
Yeah, who's most likely to buy from you, essentially.
Exactly that, and again, look at, from a messaging point of view, what messages turn them on, what channels are they using. All of this data can be into your model, so you can use that to say what is the right approach for marketing to this audience to make sure that you get that best return on marketing investment.
Media channels is another area to think about. Just doing a bit of research, just seeing what people were talking about with regards to channels to target SMEs was quite astonishing, because people talk about obviously search, PPC, SEO as being the key channels to think about when you're targeting SMEs. Right. And they are, from a performance perspective, they are very important, don't get me wrong. But when you're talking about such a vast market, it amazed me that no one's talking about TV or traditional above the line, such as out of home, as channels to be using. Or
it's because in B2B we're frightened, aren't we? We're frightened by above the line media. We're always using that targeting, because we're so paranoid about wastage. This idea that for every dollar I spend, 50% is wasted. Well, it's this wastage problem. We need to get over it, because this is sheer volume here. We need to talk to vast audiences. Sheer volume gives us that return, gives us that effectiveness.
Sure. I think a lot of people are going to say now that they just don't have the budgets for TV. and a lot of above-the-line formats.
Well, first of all, it's cheaper than they ever think.
Yeah, well, especially now with Sky AdSmart, for example, where it's very targeted TV advertising, where I could be sitting in my lounge watching the same program as my neighbour, and we'll both get served different ads because they are serving those ads based on...
Yeah. For our international viewers, you probably should explain that Sky AdSmart is a UK service, so Sky is a terrestrial broadcaster, and that they've been collecting over the last 10 years all this fantastic data on their audiences. So now they're selling 30-second slots on TV where they're targeting these individual households, as Cos says, and that includes some B2B data that we can get. Yeah. So we can start to target this SME audience.
Yeah, so it starts to become affordable and highly targeted. Also programmatic, Absolutely. Of course, we have to talk about. A lot of people have been sceptical about using programmatic in B2B, saying that you can't pinpoint your audiences effectively enough, but we've proven that that's not the case with very quite niche products. But when you're talking to the SME market, which is much broader, it becomes even more relevant. And when you start thinking about certain private networks, so we've built our own private networks where you can target The Guardian, the Financial Times, The Economist, etc., quite specifically. And reduce the cost per thousand by about 75%, it starts to really become a relevant place to go. Yeah,
programmatic is one of those things that we're going to be talking about probably in a future episode of B2B TV. I think that there's a lot of talk about programmatic, but there's also a lot of people who are misunderstanding what it is. It isn't PPC, it isn't search, it is absolutely big data driven. So we'll be talking, I think, to that later on. But just to your point where you were talking about some of those kind of news outlets, really, that's where we also see this audience going. They are traditional people. They go for traditional media. So we're seeing that they go for broadcast news, and we see that they go for the national dailies. So in the UK, that would include the Telegraph and the Daily Mail. For our US viewers, the Daily Mail here in the UK is a little bit more of a traditional title. So they're in that space. And as they go up to mid-market, then we start to see that they're starting to look a little bit more like enterprise consumers. So they are watching as far up as CNN, FT, Wall Street Journal, but certainly things like The Economist. They're incredibly, these are people with 50 employees. They're reading The Economist. They want to be kept informed of worldly events.
And SMEs don't have the time or resources to go through protracted buying decisions. They will be buying on an emotional connection, on trust. So building that brand awareness is absolutely key. Of course, they buy on price as well. That's well documented. But if you don't want to get into a price battle, that brand connection is absolutely important, which is why those channels are so key. We talked about in the first episode the 90% rule, where when someone somewhere has a problem, the first place they look is to their head for a solution, and 1, 2 or 3 brands will come to mind. And if you fast forward to who they buy from, in 90% of the case, it's one of those 3 brands that they could mention up front. So that's about that emotional connection, and these channels are absolutely important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we focused a lot on like the broadcast media in terms of this conversation, but also that relevancy piece is absolutely critical. So how we talk to this audience is the thing that we should talk about next. Yeah. So segmentation, of course, we should be segmenting by size. The way that a micro business is acting in the way that they buy solutions from a mid-sized organisation is completely different. So we need to segment on size, but we also should segment on vertical markets. So the way that a plumber is buying services from a doctor is completely different. So we should be looking at those different clusters as well.
Yeah. And our data modelling is going to absolutely help with getting us there.
It is. One of the other things that this audience are doing, and they've historically done it, is that they've gone and looked at their own networks. So they're small organisations. They don't have the advantage of turning to a colleague that sat next to them necessarily. So they tend to look outside their 4 walls. So inside, in the UK, we have the Federation of Small Business. So traditionally, they might have connected via a network like that. As we've obviously digitised, then people are increasingly looking to social media. So of course, social media should be a huge part in how you go out to reach this audience.
Absolutely.
The rise of the millennial actually is significant. So by 2020, 50% of all employees will be millennials. So they tend to be involved in the research phase of the purchase. So it's absolutely critical that we have a social media approach that's targeting these very kind of often very vertically aligned networks.
Yeah, so that broad reach again is really important. You need to be thinking about who the influencers are for SMEs. A lot of SMEs rate their friends' family or their accountant as being the key people that are going to come to for advice. So that broad reach is absolutely important.
It is. They often turn to those same people because they're looking for a guidance, but actually that's where marketing can come in. So just being useful, providing content that's useful, being generous with your marketing, that's also something that that we would advocate.
Yeah, SMEs don't want to be sold to, and they're time poor. So anything that we can do to help them do their jobs is going to establish a really good bond.
Well, the other thing is that once you create some useful content, they then use those social networks that we were just talking about to then remark on that. So we often talk about marketing or content being remarkable. Yeah. So that's obviously something that's really important.
I guess when you look at your content piece, you look at it and say, would I share this? Just that in itself is a very subjective measure, but you know that if you get an immediate instinct as to whether that would be the case, and you know that if you're ticking that box, you're doing something right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, it's clear that the SME market is complex, as so many dissimilar businesses are clustered under the SME tag, but it makes for a very interesting, potentially hugely rewarding part of the market to work in. We're going to leave you with a case study for Yell, who've had huge success targeting the SME market.
We hope you found what we've been talking about useful today. If you'd like to get in touch, we really hope you do, then please contact us using the details below. Bye for now.
Thanks for watching.